Thanks, Sean. And yeah, guys, we are going to record this just so that we can disseminate it to other folks who weren't able to come tonight. Um, you're welcome to come on camera, but you're also welcome to stay off camera. And we'll probably give it maybe like a couple more minutes. I know this is a little quick after the typical working hour, so maybe folks are to just getting situated. Um, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your curiosity and engagement on this issue. This event is intended to provide some background information and commenting tips in reference to the 11th Outer Continental Shelf 5-year leasing plan, currently spearheaded by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. You might hear us refer to them as BOEM. And give folks an opportunity to ask questions and get some clarity as you uh, prepare to draft your own comments. So my name is Satchel Pandolfino. I'm the Clean Water Lead for Cook Inlet Keeper, which is a community nonprofit organization. We're based on the Kenai Peninsula. And Inlet Keeper was created about just over 30 years ago by a group of people that were really concerned about the impacts of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and who really wanted to do something to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so oil and gas advocacy has always kind of been the heart of Inlet Keeper's work, although of course we've grown to work on many other issues as well. And I will pause to let Hannah introduce herself with the legal firm Earth Justice. Hannah.
Thanks, Satchel. Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here. I'm Hannah Foster. I'm an associate attorney in Earth Justice's Alaska office based in Anchorage. And I've been working on Cook Inlet oil and gas issues alongside Cook Inlet Keeper for a little over 3 years now. And I'll also call out, I see Laura Esquivel on the call, who is great to see. And Laura works with me at Earth Justice. She's in our policy and legislation department and focuses on Alaska and Arctic issues.
Great. And likewise, Ben also works for Inlet Keeper as our energy analysis. And Sean as well is coming on just to help us with this particular issue for the next, or like for the last month and a half or so. So we're all here to help. And I'm going to provide a bit of the lay of the land for our discussion today. We're talking about the 5 discretionary lease sales proposed in Cook Inlet that are part of BOEM's nationwide 5-year leasing plan for the federal waters of the United States. And if you've done a little research already into this proposal, you may also be aware that nearly the entire coastline of Alaska has proposed oil and gas leases within this 5-year plan on the table, and all of which are very concerning. But today we're going to primarily focus on the leases slated for Cook Inlet for a number of reasons. One, because we do believe sort of the true intention and main priority of the federal administration is focused on developing oil and gas in Cook Inlet. And that sense is really reinforced by our federal delegation, Murkowski and Sullivan, who explicitly came out in opposition to the oil and gas development proposed in the plan for all other areas of Alaska, including the Arctic, and explicitly except for Cook Inlet. So we do believe that the priority and the most likely area of the oil and gas leasing that will remain in the plan is Cook Inlet. And of course, Cook Inlet Keeper, this is our scope, or geographic scope of work. And we imagine most of you are residents of the Cook Inlet area or tied to it in some way. And so if you've been tracking the oil and gas proposals in Cook Inlet, you might also be aware that these 5 proposed lease sales in the plan are not the only lease sales on the table in Cook Inlet right now. There's also 6 lease sales that have been mandated by Congress as part of the Big Beautiful Bill. And this is for the same area, the same federal waters of Cook Inlet. And as far as we are aware, there will not be any public process or NEPA analysis associated with those Big Beautiful Bill lease sales. Um, and so because we don't have an opportunity to comment on those lease sales, one thing that will be important to emphasize in your comments for the 5-year plan lease sales is that all future oil and gas leasing in Cook Inlet deserves a robust public process. So we really, even though we can't comment on all of them, just again and again getting on the record that we want to take advantage of public processes. We want to comment, we want to share our local knowledge when it comes to developing this resource, the waters of Lower Cook Inlet that we all share. Um, and you might also choose to emphasize that because of this existence of the 6 lease sales proposed in the or slated to move forward in the Big Beautiful Bill, these 5 lease sales proposed in the 5-year plan are discretionary and unwarranted because we already have these other lease sales on the table that Congress has already mandated must move forward. And so in this moment in time, we have less than 10 days to get our comments in on the 5-year plan. And it's so important that we do. So thank you for being here to learn more. The deadline is next Friday, January 23rd at 7:59 p.m. Alaska time. And we do plan to send out a follow-up email with a link to the comment portal with talking points and just some of this information in writing for you to reference. So look for that email tomorrow morning. And I do want to emphasize that I know it can feel a little fruitless to make comments over and over again, especially under the current administration who has made their objective really clear about where they stand with drilling. But our communities have stood up many times over to say no to leasing in Lower Cook Inlet, and that past participation in the public process for these 5-year leasing plans has had really significant impacts, and we can have an impact again. And just for example, in the past, based on feedback we have given BOEM from our participation, BOEM moved forward shrinking the leasing area size in the past. So they heard our concerns and they made the area open to oil and gas a little bit smaller. So that was a win. We also had a big win during the last 5-year planning process where we actually got all of Cook Inlet removed from the 5-year plan. And then our comments have also been the basis for legal wins. So the last lease sale that did take place in this area was lease sale 258. Cook Inlet Keeper worked with Earth Justice and other organizations to challenge that lease sale in court, and we were successful. So these comments do really make a difference and are very worth doing. And the federal government is really trying to whittle away at our resolve around this issue and hoping that, in this moment of time when there are so many issues to care about, we will have less engagement and our voices will be weaker. But I think it's really our responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because the next administration could be a lot more favorable. They could throw out this 5-year plan, just like this administration did to the last one. And in the meantime, we do really need to build the record for the legal work ahead. And so I'm going to pass the mic to Hannah to really get into the meat of today's discussion, but I just wanted to lay that groundwork of why this is important and share my appreciation for everyone for leaning in right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Satchel. That was really great context. And yeah, I'm happy to take over. I'll start sharing my screen. I've got some slides. All right. How is that? Can you see it? Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for being here and considering commenting on this plan. Like Satchel said, I know it's exhausting and you feel like you got to keep coming back, and we really appreciate that you do. And I just want to say at the top that I don't want you to get confused over, whether you should be drafting your own individual comments or signing comment letters or doing any one thing over the other. I would say do it all. Sign any letters that come your way that you agree with, and also draft your own comments, especially if you live in Alaska, especially if you live on Cook Inlet. Those individual comments are so powerful. And the agency just doesn't see a lot of them. There aren't that many people in Alaska. A lot of the people that they hear from who oppose drilling in Alaska are not in Alaska. They're in California or DC. And so I think having these local voices and sharing why this place is really valuable to you is something that is just really good to have on record. And they're probably going to try to still go forward with their terrible plan. We know that, but they'll have to do it in the face of everything that we put in front of them. So it does matter. But anyway, I will try to be relatively brief, and I am not going to spend a ton of time on the legal stuff, I promise, because it's pretty straightforward. But I want to cover three things, and those are what BOEM needs to consider, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the agency making this plan and these decisions. What do they need as they're doing this process? What does the draft plan actually say about Alaska and Cook Inlet that they've put out so far? And then the third thing is just some tips for commenting, things you might think about talking about when you do submit comments. Okay, so first of all, it's pretty straightforward, like I said. So there's a law called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, OXLA as we refer to it. And that's the law under which these plans are promulgated and under which the federal government leases our submerged lands for oil and gas drilling. And this law says that they have to consider several things when they do this. And these are mostly found in Section 18 of the law. But really, the thing I want you to take away from this is that it is very broad. And almost anything that you think are relevant, that you think should go in your comments, you can fit them into some of these categories. Like you'll see here, it says economic, social, and environmental values of the resources in the offshore continental shelf. That's really broad. The potential impact of oil and gas exploration on the resource values of the OCS. Information about geographical, geological, and ecological characteristics. So really broad. And then, at the end, there's even a kind of catch-all thing that says relevant environmental and predictive information. So don't waste time worrying about whether something's relevant or whether the agency cares or whatever. I would say put it in. And if you want to refer to this to help you structure your comments, a lot of people do that, and that can be helpful. But yeah, we'll move on from the legal stuff now because, like I said, broad. Say what you want, say what you feel. Don't worry so much about the legal side of it. And next, I want to talk about really specifically, what does the draft plan say about Alaska? These are massive documents that most people don't ever actually interact with. But I, as a lawyer, have the good fortune of being the one who reads the document and gets to tell you about it. So I pulled out some things I thought might be interesting and relevant to Alaska and to Cook Inlet. So we'll start with just the map. And this is what Satchel was talking about earlier. You can see it. It's pretty scary. These are all the regions where they want to do leasing and the years when they want to do it. And you'll notice that everywhere is included. Most of these regions, it's a little further out, the Aleutians after 2030. But Cook Inlet, it's a lot of sales and it's right away. So 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030, and 2031. And another thing I'll point out is that based on the maps and the things they're presenting, they are now looking again at leasing the entire Cook Inlet area. Like Satchel said before, the area had been shrunk down and the last few sales have only been of 20% of the Cook Inlet area, but they're using this process now to throw back open all the way south down to Kodiak. And so that's another thing you should be aware of. And to get into more of some of the nitty gritty numbers stuff, this chart shows you what BOEM thinks is actually economically recoverable under its projections as far as oil and gas in Cook Inlet. And I think you might find some of these numbers interesting because I think most of us who live here know that there's a gas shortage coming and that currently the only thing that's produced from Cook Inlet is gas. The real interest is in gas. But if you look at these numbers and you look at the Cook Inlet column, you'll see that almost everything they expect to be economically recoverable from Cook Inlet is oil. It's not gas. It's not really that much oil, and it's not really that much gas. I think being generous, looking at the high price scenario, which is, that if the resource costs the most, they're going to have the money to get the most out of it. So the high price scenario, they are estimating 0.35 TCF of gas. That translates to about 350 BCF. And I'll pause for a brief trivia question and see if anyone knows what the annual demand is on the rail belt for gas in BCF. Ben knows. What is it, Ben?
70 BCF.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 70 to 80 BCF.
I was about to put that in the chat, so good
Great.
thing.
Yeah, so the point here being just that's if you do the math, that's 4 to 5 years supply at even the high price scenario. And could things change? Is this just a projection? Of course, but I just wanted to point out that based on what BOEM is thinking right now, based on their projections, there's a couple years of gas there at the most. Okay, going forward, what else do they think about Cook Inlet? So this is an interesting chart where they have taken it upon themselves to compare the net benefit, the cost versus the benefits of drilling here. And you'll see they think there's quite a lot of benefit. Under the high price scenario, they think there'd be, $55 billion worth of benefit to Cook Inlet. Interestingly, though, they assign almost nothing to the costs. So you'll see under the low and mid price scenario, they say zero environmental cost to Cook Inlet of drilling here. Under the high price scenario, maybe 100 million is the highest they'll go. And I just want you to know that part of why it seems odd to me, part of why it turns out this way is because there's no consideration here of intangible values. There's what subsistence means to us, what personal use fishing means to us. That doesn't factor into this. It also makes no consideration of catastrophic oil spills. It just doesn't factor in. They say, it's not that likely, so we're just not going to look at that risk. So that helps explain how some of these numbers come out. Going forward, I think this is my last big chart, so bear with me, but this one talks about environmental sensitivity, and they go through and rank all of the different sections of the OCS that they're looking at leasing. So this includes California and the Gulf and the Atlantic even. And they do recognize that Cook Inlet is one of the most sensitive ecologically regions in the United States. It's ranked third. The other ones above it are Hope Basin, which is also in Alaska, and then the Straits of Florida, so like by the Everglades. So it's not the fact that they're leasing here isn't necessarily because they're unaware. They know the belugas are there. They know they're endangered. They know all of these important species live here. They know it's a sensitive area, and yet the lease sales are still being scheduled. So little puzzle there. Here are I pulled some direct quotes out just on different topics that I thought you might find interesting. So again, talking about oil spills, I told you before, they don't consider catastrophic oil spills in that economic analysis. They also do not anywhere in the plan consider oil spills from tankers or barges. They say that's not a direct effect of leasing, so we don't have to look at it. And I know all of you know that Exxon Valdez was a tanker spill. And so it seems to me that it's pretty inappropriate to consider leasing in this region and say tanker spills are not our problem. Even though they're the most common way that oil is spilled, we're not going to look at it. And so that's one thing they say. Another interesting kind of double speak that they do is they say they do repeatedly recognize that subsistence is very important in Alaska, that it is irreplaceable as a social and cultural matter. So they say here, BOEM recognizes that subsistence is irreplaceable as a social and cultural matter. However, in the very next paragraph, they say, BOEM specifically requests public comments on the quantification and monetization of environmental and social costs, particularly impacts on subsistence resources. So they go straight from saying, we recognize this is irreplaceable to put a dollar sign on it. Tell us how much this actually means to you. And I think, and they have been told already, at Alaska Native organizations have commented and said it's not monetizable, it is not replaceable. You can't assign a dollar value to what subsistence means to us. And I think that that's something that's worth lifting up, and I think is true for so many of us. I have an anecdote here. My husband was born and raised in Alaska, grew up in Petersburg fishing village. And I just kind of casually asked him the other night, I said, hey, what would it cost? Like, what could the government pay you to never fish again? And first he joked and he was like, well, they'd have to buy back all my fishing gear and that's going to set him back. But then he thought about it seriously for a minute and he said, I don't think I can do that. It's not something you can put a value on. And I was like, exactly. That's what I think. I think it's just something that you can't, like, fishing is such a big part. Still, he's not a fisherman anymore, but it's such a big part of his life and who he is, and a big part of my life because of that. And yeah, I think that for so many of us, it's hard to convey what that value is. And I think that's something that BOEM needs to hear from as many people as possible, because doesn't seem to be actually translating into their analysis. Okay, some more things they've said. So on renewables, they have acknowledged that as far as other resources in Cook Inlet, offshore resources, there is a combined 95 gigawatts of combined offshore wind and tidal energy in the Cook Inlet planning area, which is massive. I'm going to turn to Ben again. Ben, can you tell me what the peak demand is for electricity on the rail belt?
About 750 megawatts.
Exactly. Yeah. So our potential to generate electricity from renewables in Cook Inlet is well over 100 times the actual demand that we have. We have so many resources there that are just sitting untapped. And are they scheduling any offshore lease sales? No. So I think that's something that you might want to talk to them about as well. All right, I have a couple more. I just wanted to point this out because they use a lot of confusing language, and my feeling is that it makes me feel kind of gross reading it. But this is a paragraph where they're talking about how hard it is to value put a dollar sign on extinct species. Like, what do we really lose when we extinguish a species? How much dollar value are we losing? And so they go through these long, kind of cryptic, economic, technical laden discussion of it. But the point here, I just want you to know, when you're seeing these terms like hurdle price analysis, amenity value, portfolio of future uses, that's essentially them just saying, yeah, well, we're trying to assign a value to these species. We want to be able to say, yeah, we're gonna miss out on, X $100 million of value when the belugas go extinct, and so then we can justify it by saying, oh, but we're gonna make this much by drilling. And it seems like a kind of concerning direction to go to me, but I'll leave that up to your analysis. Okay, I think this is my last one. Just wanted to point out that as far as timing, these projects, OCS projects, take a really long time. They're not something that just can pop up overnight. And BOEM acknowledges that. They say it can take 10 years or more from the lease to initial production, and the production cannot rapidly scale up to address sudden energy crises. So we're looking at a gas shortfall, I think, as soon as next year, 2027, 2028. New drilling in the OCS is not the kind of thing that is going to come online in time to help us with that, though they say it is. But it's worth being skeptical of, I think. Okay, so we've come to our last thing, which is, what are some tips for commenting? What do we think might be worth suggesting? And I've covered a lot of it already, but just to reiterate, I think, like I said, it's really important for BOEM to hear, especially from urban residents. I think they're much more aware of what subsistence means to rural residents and to Alaska Native villages. But if they could hear from a lot of people in Anchorage, in Homer, in Kenai, of people saying like, no, hey, I do personal use fisheries, I do subsistence fisheries, I do recreational fishing. I use all of these resources and they're really important to me. I think that's really important for them to hear because I think I wouldn't want them to get the impression that, it's not that important in urban Alaska because I don't think that's true. I think it's very important to many people here. Um, and of course, I know people there. We were talking with someone at the beginning of the call who was here during the Exxon spill. So I think any personal experience with that and why you might think it's inappropriate for BOEM to ignore catastrophic spills, to ignore spills from tankers in its analysis. And another thing is that the weather and conditions in Cook Inlet, a lot of people have spent a lot of time out on the water and they know how crazy things can get and how that might affect, operations for seismic or other things that oil and gas companies are doing in the waters there. And I think that's an important thing for them to hear about, just that oil spill cleanup, something like that, is just not feasible in these conditions. Of course, the belugas, we all love the belugas. And any, personal attachment or relationship you have there. And then, where do you want your energy to come from? You can talk about renewables, you can talk about other things, other plans that you think BOEM should be spending its time on. And then another thing would be, if you look at the companies who are likely to bid, I think we all know that it's just one to a few players who are possible bidders in Cook Inlet. And I think we might know that there's some questionable records there that might be worth bringing up in your comments as well. And then really just any other concerns you have, any other thoughts that you want to communicate to the government as they're making this decision. Yeah, I think that brings me to the end. And that was pretty efficient, right?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Hannah. So yeah, we're going to move on into our just like open dialogue section of the meeting. I don't know, maybe I did want to like give Ben or Sean an opportunity to speak to that last comment point that Hannah made around Hillcorp and, well, I'll name it Hillcorp and their track record in Upper Cook Inlet and across the nation, and why having a company specifically who has that track record increases the risk of spill in Lower Cook Inlet.
Take it away, Ben.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure most of the Cook Inlet area residents on this call are familiar with Hillcorp. But basically the essential point about them is that this poor track record we keep referring to um, uh, is not so much an accident as core to their business model, which is uh, refurbishing old oil and gas equipment um, that larger drillers have found unprofitable, and then doing it on the cheap and squeezing the last drops out of it. And this business model is based on cutting corners. The business model is cutting corners. And they're if they are planning to branch out into doing fresh developments in Lower Cook Inlet, there's no reason to think that they would not bring that same approach to it. And if you look at the map of the Lower Cook Inlet, that's there are some rough waters there, icy waters, and some of you might remember the 2017 Middle Ground Shoal gas pipeline leak. in Cook Inlet where I believe this was a 60-year-old pipeline beneath the inlet. Was it was a gas pipeline that ruptured in February of that year under the ice. It was inaccessible. Hillcorp went back and forth with the state and refused to shut off the pipe. It leaked gas for months into the inlet, and that's kind of a real world example of how we could expect them to operate in similar situations um, in the Kodiak Strait, where accessibility is going to be even more of a challenge. So, um,
Thanks, Ben.
so yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that reminded me of one other thing that I meant to mention that's related. So the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which is like the enforcement agency for federal oil and gas, the Alaska director of BSEE actually commented on this plan in the spring and said, I do not have the staff to even monitor what we have now. At current right now there are 8 leases in Cook Inlet and there's I think 6 in the Arctic in the federal waters. And the director of the federal employee, the director said, I don't have enough staff to even sustain current levels. And basically the implication was like either I need more staff or you can't lease this much more because there's not going to be anyone there to monitor and enforce. So I think that's another thing folks should be aware of is that the head of the federal agency in Alaska who's responsible for overseeing this has already said that they're completely understaffed and there just wouldn't be anyone to monitor.
That's very concerning. Thanks for bringing that to light, Hannah. So yeah, we wanted to open it up for folks to ask questions, and thanks for raising your hand. Um, Person on the phone, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Yeah.
Okay, hi, this is Becky up in Talkeetna. So you said that you think their real purpose is the leasing in Cook Inlet and not the other areas. Why do they have such a nut for Cook Inlet as opposed to the other areas?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let others address this. I think that because Cook Inlet is already quite industrialized and it is the population's one, the host of 1/3 of Alaska's population, it is the easiest to bring more industrialization to the access. And I don't know, Ben, what are your additional thoughts?
Well, it's as as Satchel said, it's kind of it's close to market. It has a history of uh, of drilling and it's also kind of taken on symbolic value, I would say. The the lease sale the last lease sale that happened, lease sale 258. Um, as Satchel mentioned earlier, we successfully mounted a legal challenge to it, and at one point it was canceled due to lack of industry interest, and it happened anyway due to an act of Congress, which kind of I think this was during as Biden was passing the climate legislation that became the Inflation Reduction Act. They as part of the negotiations over that, they put this lease sale and Cook Inlet
Right.
back into it, which to me really demonstrates kind of the inflated political importance of Cook Inlet oil and gas as a symbol, that's completely out of proportion to its actual to the industry's actual interest in it. So Yeah, that's my kind of attempt to rationalize that.
Okay, thank you. I just was curious. I've been commenting on this stuff for a long time, and I was around when the Exxon Valdez, the whole spill and everything, and so anyway, I really appreciate what you all have said. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here, Becky. Does anyone else have any questions? Do you have any ideas about what you personally might want to write about, and if you'd like any feedback, we're happy to give you that.
Hey, this is Mike Knutson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so I didn't catch it at the beginning, and I wanted to get it clarified. I think you said that Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski were opposed to other actions, but not opposed to this one.
Correct. Yeah, they kind of left Cook Inlet out to dry there. They did make a public statement pushing back against the planning areas and the leases proposed in the other coastal regions of Alaska, including the Arctic, but gave their nod of approval for Cook Inlet.
So does that match the map that we saw earlier where it showed all the regions and the Cook Inlet was this one? So they opposed the others, supported this one.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I didn't catch if there was what their reasoning was. Is it similar to the last answer to the last question? It's more developed, it's a bigger population area, or do we know?
I would imagine so. Hannah or
I
others.
can I can hop in on that one. Just from a perspective, like from the governor's, it was a sustainable energy conference that was focused on fossil fuels this summer. I think it was either the mayor of the North of Utqiagvik or North Slope Borough, as a supporter of fossil fuels, had said that they know where to draw the line, and that's to protect their subsistence resources, and that's in the Arctic. So I think that across like the Chukchi and Beaufort and other regions that have seen local opposition for that, like there's a recognition that they're striking a balance between having allies, kind of pro-oil voices who support onshore drilling, but listening to them when they say they don't want offshore. And that's not the same dynamic all across the Arctic and other communities, but I think that there's been a recognition of those subsistence resources in a way that we haven't necessarily seen here in Cook Inlet.
Thank you. I also see that Ben posted a statement. I'll go look at that.
Well, yeah, does Sean, Ben, or Hannah, is there anything else that like you want to offer if people don't have questions? Any other nuggets to chew on?
I have a question. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Great. Mm-hmm.
This might be a little bit out of the subject area, but I'm wondering have they ever been interested in drilling in Kachemak Bay? Is there any oil in Kachemak Bay, or is that something they're going to think about in the future?
No, Kachemak Bay has, well, first of all, I don't think there's any federal waters in Kachemak Bay. So BOEM would not have jurisdiction over Kachemak Bay. And the state of Alaska has, I'm not actually sure, Hannah, you can maybe share, or Ben, I'm sure you know, like what specific policy was put into place to ban oil and gas development in Kachemak Bay. But I know it was in 1973 when we bought back the original leases that had been secured by the oil industry in Kachemak Bay. The state bought those leases back and prohibited future oil and gas, but I don't remember like what policy put that in place.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if we have any fishermen on the call today, but I do think that one thing that just feels really alarming and important to consider is that While the state waters of Upper Cook Inlet are industrialized with offshore oil and gas, the lower waters are not, and the lower waters are directly overlap with our commercial fleet of drifters in Cook Inlet, as well as our charter fleet, and that that conflict of having these drifting fishing boats all summer long, utilizing those waters and having to sort of dodge these oil platforms is something that at least the fishing stakeholders that we've talked to have been very concerned about. And again, comment on what you have experience in and what matters to you, but that has been one that sort of resonated with me that I didn't have experience with, that I realized is a pretty serious issue. And Sean, I know you've been talking more to fisher folk, if there's anything else to say about that conflict there.
I think that was a great summary.
Yeah.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Mike Mosley. I'm wondering what type of oversight besides the state agency that is spent on resources might exist currently or could exist in the future, so that if this goes ahead and there is development in the inlet, that we're as careful as we can be for the environment, everything in it. So for example, if somebody wanted to put up their rig outside of an important area where fish are migrating through or whales are migrating through, mammals are using, will there be any community committee to help oversee this? Would there be anything that we could help them construct so that, because of the sensitive nature of the area, that there are more reviews that are put into decision making so that the best possible outcome for this worst scenario can be had? So if this is the only lease that's being open now and our senators are against any other, how can we develop this in the best possible way if this is going to be a thing? If a company like Hillcorp is going to bid on the lease and win the lease and start to work, how can we help that if the state's resources are thin?
It's a good and important question, Mike. Hannah or Ben, do either of you want to take a swing?
Sure, I can take that one. So I think the question was basically like, is there an opportunity to set up like citizen committees or some kind of body that would be able to, if the drilling does happen, make it as least harmful as possible? And if I'm right about that, I would say so. Yes, I mean, there's always the possibility of independently setting something like that up and just using a kind of public pressure campaign to put something like that in place. For as far as doing it through the legal process or through the leasing process, I have seen if it's early enough in the process. So for these lease sales that came as a result of this plan, if these lease sales end up getting scheduled and then they end up doing environmental analysis and they end up holding the sales, there should be points along that process where you will be able to comment and suggest something like that, and it could potentially be included in the lease terms of the sale. So yeah, I've seen mining projects, for example, where they set up subsistence committees kind of as part of the project as a result of suggestions that happened during the environmental analysis for the sale. So something like that is possible. Yeah, it takes community engagement. It takes people suggesting it and the expertise to do it. And then there's also always the legislative option too. If these, for the sales that are being legislated, I would say, yeah, absolutely call your legislator and say, hey, if you're going to if you're going to put lease sales in law, you should add some protections with that as well. Because at this point, we've seen them, as they are mandating lease sales, they are stripping protections as much as they can rather than adding protections, which is definitely a problem. Yeah, and then Satchel, I want to remember before we leave, just for you or I to talk about the next steps with the leasing plan and what the rest of the year will look like. So just a note not to forget that.
Well, we can dive into that unless anyone has any other questions. Okay. Hannah, why don't you lead us through the next parts of this process to expect?
Sure, yeah. So right now we are commenting on the draft plan. Those are due the 23rd of January, so next Friday. So this is the first draft of the plan. There will be 2 more drafts. So it goes draft plan, proposed plan, final plan. So they'll take these comments, and in a month or 2 or 3, they'll put out the next version of the plan, and we'll be able to see, did it have an effect? Which areas came out? Which areas stayed in? Probably Cook Inlet will stay in. But we will then have another chance to comment. So there will be one more round of comments before the final plan. It's important to comment early and often, and you can reference your previous comments. You don't have to type everything out again. You can attach them if you want. But yeah, we try as hard as you can to get the areas dropped from the plan as early as possible. The Secretary of Interior has, at this point, ordered them to finish and implement this plan by, I believe, November of this year. And so it's on a pretty accelerated, these things usually take longer. This is on just like everything else this administration is doing, they are moving fast, they're moving aggressively, and they want this finished by November, which is about as quickly as you could go. So the next comment period will be over the summer sometime. So especially if you think you're going to be out fishing and not paying attention, comment now for sure. Yeah, and then we'll see, unless they have to revise their plan, we'll see the final plan probably by August or September. And then it goes to Congress for 60 days, and then it becomes final, and then they move forward with lease sales. And potentially, once it is final, that's when lawsuits can commence as well, which I would be shocked if there were not lawsuits over this plan, which is another reason to keep commenting.
Thanks, Hannah.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Bud.
I had a question for Hannah. When you say it goes to Congress, what does Congress do with it, and is that potentially an intervention opportunity?
That's a great question. I haven't thought of that as a potential intervention opportunity. I think it's called like a consistency review or something like that. That's a good question. I'm not sure if at that point that Congress would be able to unilaterally pull sales out. I haven't looked into that. I wouldn't count on it, though. I think at this point you should probably assume that anything that's in the final plan will get through the current Congress.
Well,
Maybe it's
hopefully they'll be
possible.
different in November.
Yeah, it's possible. Not to put you on the spot, Laura, but Laura works with Congress a lot more than I do, so maybe Laura knows, but she can stay muted if she doesn't want to talk to you.
Hi there. I'm happy to talk, but not be seen. It's 10 o'clock here and I'm in my PJs. Um, Congress has, it's more of a formality. It's submitted to Congress for their review, and there is the potential, I think, for Congress. I don't think what they can do is intervene, like have an impact on certain areas versus other areas. It's more like, do they accept the agency's rationale for the overall plan? Congress rarely reacts to those things, But one of the reasons I can think of why they want to fast track this is November, we have an election, right? And after that, to the extent that Congress is able to do anything, there's more of a chance that they would be in a position to after the election. So they want to put this to bed before that.
Thanks. That's good
Thanks,
insight.
Laura. Thanks for being here so late too.
Yeah.
Always extra appreciation for our DC folks that work with us in Alaska a lot because they do a lot of late nights.
But this is really, really useful. Really, really great explanation, Hannah. Very helpful.
And Hannah, if you could explain one more thing, if we do not succeed in getting Cook Inlet pulled out of this plan, the lease sales that are a result of the plan, those legally have to have a NEPA and a public process still, or is that under, murky waters?
I would say as it stands now, yes. I cannot make any guarantees about the future. I mean, a major part of this administration's agenda is avoiding and dismantling NEPA obligations whenever possible. And they are doing that for the sales that are mandated. And that's my answer is technically at this point, yes, there should still be an environmental impact statement for each individual sale, and including Endangered Species Act consultations. But we're just going to have to see what happens. And Earth Justice is working at every level to try and, keep the most harmful legislation from getting through as it relates to NEPA and things like that. But it's tough right now, as everybody knows.
Well, we are very appreciative of Earth Justice for doing what you can to hold the line. The only other thing I'll say about what is coming up next is that the first lease sale of the big, beautiful Bill lease sales is slated to come as soon as March of this year. And so that is something we are tracking. We can't engage in there, like Hannah said, there is no environmental impact statement associated with that. There's no opportunity to comment, but it is a lease sale where we will get a little bit more insight on industry interest and see if Hillcorp or anyone else is actively trying to get more chunks of Cook Inlet. So.
Yeah, and I'll just note that there is currently no public process. We did, Cook Inlet Keeper and some other groups have requested a public input process. They have reached out to BOEM and repeatedly on these sales where they're not taking public input, have asked them to take public input to start a public comment period to follow the Endangered Species Act. So will they listen? Probably not at this point, but Cook Inlet Keeper is doing what they can to try and make it happen. And I'm sure that you guys will let everyone know if a public comment period does get.
Yeah, of course.
I have one more question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any science that's specific to the area, like biology reports, for example, that would help with construction of the comments to describe how important this area is biologically, but science-wise, not from a layman like myself who has seen whales and salmon and seabirds of all sorts and et cetera, but something more concrete than that? And do you have any concrete numbers on subsistence use? Do you have any numbers that were based on research that you can share that would help bolster the comments that you would include maybe tomorrow in the email that you'll send on summary?
I can jump in there, Satchel, if that's all right. So I would say we absolutely have lots of studies and data. I mean, it depends on what aspect you're talking about. I mean, like if you're talking about belugas, there's a ton of research there. There are subsistence numbers, but and Cook Inlet Keeper may very well have something they can share. But what I would say to you is that at this point, it doesn't seem like what's going to be most helpful because the truth is the agency has that information. They have the studies, they have the subsistence numbers from the state of Alaska. You can look in their plan and they say, oh, it's this many pounds of protein that's harvested per person. So a lot of that they know, and some of it may be wrong, and there are more technical comments that are being drafted by a bunch of lawyers where people are watching for things like that. But really, as individuals, the most valuable thing you can do is share your personal experience and say why it matters to you personally. It's to put a face and a real person behind those statistics, because they get a lot of technical comments. They get things, we submit letters where we attach 200 studies or something like that. They get a lot of that. But they don't get as many individual comments from people who say, hey, this affects me personally. I live here. I use these resources. And particularly, they don't get that from Alaska.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful. Appreciate that.
Well, that seems like a great sentiment to wrap up on, unless there's any last lingering questions. Okay, great. Well, really appreciate everyone for coming. We will send a follow-up email tomorrow, and you can respond to that or reach out preemptively if you have questions you think of at 3 a.m. this morning. So we'll do our best to help you feel confident moving forward drafting comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Hannah and Sean and Ben. That was great. Appreciated.